Hello, and welcome back to the Prog Connection. We are back with Worst to Best. This is the second one. We have recorded a third one. It's coming out soon, so anyone who's worrying about that, don't worry. We're going to get Rush out very, very shortly. Today we are talking about a little bit more of an unknown band outside of the prog world. People know who Rush is. People know who Pink Floyd is. People know who Genesis is. People even know who Yes is because of Roundabout. However, I don't think Camel ever had a big smash hit that literally put them on the face of radio, and they're not a big internet sensation other than where you can find them on the Prog Archives or on music review websites in general. Some prog channels will mention the band, we'll talk about the band, and talk about the music, the history, etc. This is a very underground prog band. They've been around since the early mid-70s. People might not know Camel, but they'll know Andy Latimer because he's been involved with a lot of other projects, including a couple of big prog bands, and I believe he's featured, he's been on the new Colin Bass album, along with guesting on plenty of other records outside of just doing Camel. So, people know who Andy Latimer is. We're here to talk about his baby, Camel, which has yet to put out a studio album, a written studio work, for over 20 years. So, it's not like we have to worry about updating the list unless they decide to pull out a new album anytime soon. They've been inactive, but I'm thinking that with Andy finally, coming out of being sick and saying that his progress has been good, if I remember the video properly, then I'm sure we'll get an update on a Camel album sometime soon. What do you want to say, Dad, before we get down to breaking down their studio discography?
I would just say that for anyone who's not familiar with Camel, they do have an English symphonic prog style.
Yes.
With a little bit of jazz fusion inflections here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And on a few albums, they have a little bit of the Canterbury scene as a result of having several members of Caravan actually end up being members of Camel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So that, if to describe them, they're kind of like Genesis with a little bit of jazz fusion and a little bit of Canterbury thrown in.
Right?
That's the style.
Mm-hmm. They definitely were a lot more straight prog before Richard Sinclair came into the band, and then they did Rain Dances. They started changing up their sound pretty shortly after that. And then you had songs off of Breathless, which kind of dictated where the rest of the band's songwriting would go. And ever since then, it's been a pretty solid discography since then. So, there are 14 different albums, 15 in total. We will talk about all 15. Technically, it's only going to be 14 because of, you'll see when we get to it. So, without further ado, I think it would be a very, very good idea to start off and tell a little bit about our 14th pick. Let's go. Dad, you have the floor.
For number 14, I picked the debut. I think that they didn't really capture the essence of their sound on their first album, which is not unusual for a debut album, that people don't really get into the full sound that you hear a few albums later.
Yep.
I think the debut has a little bit of a Doorsy feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really what they sound like later on.
No.
So it's a bit of an anomaly. It's not that it's a bad album. It's just it doesn't really sound like later Camel, so
Mhm.
it's a bit of an outlier in their discography, and I think overall it's a little bit weak.
Yeah.
It's not one of their great albums, so yeah, the debut at 14.
So my number 14 is the album Harbor of Tears. I generally think that it's a good album. This is a concept album that just seems to do the least for me. I do like the slight fresh music themes that come in with a little bit more of the Irish tones that are recurring in the songwriting from time to time, but I don't see what this album is bringing to the table that other concept albums like New, Dust and Dreams, Stationary Traveler did differently. I don't see what it does differently that those albums didn't already do. So I don't see this as a bad album. I think that it's very good. It's just kind of. It's not their strongest work. I don't have any big standout tracks. The production is good. The drums don't work for me. I don't love the drum sound myself. And other than that, I just don't have any standout tracks to talk about. They're all decent. I just find that this one is, for me, the album that I connect with least. So, number 13.
At number 13, I have A Nod and a Wink
Mm.
from 2002, which I guess is their last album. The more recent albums from in the 90s and then up into the early 2000s are suffer from Andy doing too much of singing of his own, too much of the vocals are his vocals, and he's not a crazy good singer. He's okay. He captures the mood of his songs, but I don't know why he doesn't get someone, because on earlier albums he had such good singers.
I don't know why he isn't, Dad, to basically, I think, finish your point, and I think something that you and I will agree with here is while Andy isn't a bad singer by any means, I just don't think that he's the singer to carry a full album. And the thing is that Colin Bass is still the bass player of this band. Why isn't he using his vocals? He doesn't have a single, even on Dust and Dreams, I don't think he has backing vocals credit, which is nuts to me. It's crazy.
This album is certainly the most recent phase from the 90s to the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
That the phase that we don't know if there'll be another phase of Camel or not at this point, but the most recent and maybe the last phase of Camel is A Nod and a Wink, and it's kind of it's like there's no bad Camel albums, so it's not a bad album.
No, I agree.
It's definitely it's a good album. It's just it's
nothing stands out about it. Yeah,
13th. It doesn't stand out for me. So
yeah, exactly. And for me, Dad, my number 13 is also A Nod and a Wink. Again, just like what you were saying, I found nothing special about this album. It sounds like Camel by numbers, basically. It's kind of like Harbor of Tears without the concept. I do think that there are some decent songs here, and generally it's just not doing anything for me, me personally. It's not doing anything particularly new. Good. I think we can agree there. It's good. It's just non-essential. The standout tracks for me were the title track, A Nod and a Wink, and For Today. I actually enjoy For Today. It's a very nice track. Generally, all things considered. Problem is that we've listened to these albums, and Nod and a Wink, I can't fully remember the music very well, even though we just listened to it a couple of days ago. 12th for you, Dad, is?
At number 12, I had Stationary Traveler, which you could almost say was the beginning of this final or most recent phase of Camel, starting in 1984 and then carrying on to the 80s into the 90s and then into the early 2000s. This one does have several other great vocalists on it.
Yep.
It has, I believe, Colin Bass,
Yep.
and I believe it has Chris Rainbow on it.
It does indeed.
Songs are great. It's a really solid album,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just not good enough to be higher than for me. It's not good enough to be higher. So
Mm-hmm. My number 12 is the debut from 73. Aside from a few good songs, this feels like an album that suffers from the most of its amateur sound. Too much sounding like the Doors for my personal taste. It's not like they're doing a terrible job. I don't think that you and I disagree. I don't think we disagree there. It's not like they're doing a terrible job. And Peter Bardens, he definitely nails that sound. I think when it comes down to the organ sounds, I think Peter Bardens did a very good job. I think that the single is good, but otherwise it's not a ton to get all up in arms about. I know that people like this one. I just think that they did better. The standout tracks for me are Mystic Queen, which to me generally sounds like Camel finding their way, and Never Let Go, which was the single. Generally very good. Just think that they absolutely 1000% did better works. Number 11, Dad.
at number 11, I had 1991's Dust and Dreams. This is a concept album that is based on John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a lot to do with the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So the concept is great, and it's executed extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a great concept album.
Yeah.
A solid 90s Camel album.
All right. So my number 11 is Stationary Traveler. This album centers on this is me reading from the Wikipedia, so I forgot to write this out. Centering on the trials of East Germany's refugees attempting to cross the Berlin Wall from East Berlin into West Berlin. Very, very, very cool concept, I think. And I think the opening of this album, Pressure Points, reminds me a lot of Moon Madness's opening. Oddly enough, it's just a lot more on the modern Camel side of that. Much gloomier, darker, and a little bit nicer. I don't know, it's just a little less aggressive in a way. Has some songs that remind me of early-ish Camel. Definitely got more of an Alan Parsons feel to it when you actually get down to the songs like Refugee. It's produced well for its time. Well done musically. And of course, the guests like Chris Rainbow and David Payton. No lead vocals from David Payton for whatever reason. But those guys are always welcome. I just think this is where most of the Camel discography starts losing itself a bit when it comes down to the time. Once 84 started, I think Camel started losing a bit of itself, a tiny bit.
I think that at that right around there is when they lost their major recording contract.
Mm-hmm. That's when I think they
Oh, they're
started going
starting to do
independent.
things on their own.
Yeah. That's when they were done with the Ram, I think. All right, number 10.
Number 10, I have Harbor of Tears. In the theme of Dust and Dreams, this is another concept album. It was the next album from 1996. And this one focuses on the Irish Great Potato Famine and the migration of many Irish people to the Americas. So it's a solid concept album. And it's very similar in style to Dust and Dreams. And I guess that, Camel was kind of finding a new style then, a new way of looking at things. And I would hope that should there be another Camel album, that this is kind of this and Dust and Dreams are mold for what I would hope that they would do next. Something similar. Find a concept and put it to music, which is kind of their style. So I think it's an absolutely great album. So It's worthy of the top 10.
My number 10 is Rajaz, released in 99. Rajaz definitely does try to engage that retro Camel feel. The cover in itself reminds you of old Camel. It really does. And the music to a point also does as well, in songwriting and feel. However, while I do think that this album is solid, I just don't think that it accomplished what it was set out to do, as well as people on Prog Archives claim. Songs like Rajaz and Three Wishes bring that sound. However, it ends up sounding more like the Camel that was being released at the time, with a sprinkle of the old stuff, which is nice. I also think that Andy, while being a decent singer, isn't good enough to carry this full album himself. He has Colin Bass. Use him, please. Good, non-essential. The standout tracks were Three Wishes and Rajaz, and I did like Lawrence too. That one was good too. Overall, solid, quality, good, but non-essential. Number 9.
Well, I'm following behind you as usual again. I had Rajaz. It does follow along in the style of Harbor of Tears and Dust and Dreams, so it's another solid 90s Camel album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an essential Camel album,
Yeah.
but if you like any of those other late 80s, early 90s Camel albums, this is a solid one and very enjoyable.
Yeah.
So it's a high quality Camel album.
All right. My number 9 was Dust and Dreams, released in 91. Camel albums start getting really good for me here. Really sad that this album is so low, but I don't think it's better than the other albums on this list. The production is good, the songwriting is solid. I love the tone and structure, and David Payton is, again, a great voice to have. Nothing truly to complain about. The interludes are also nice. I will say that I think Camel did better albums, though. The standout tracks for me are Dust Bowl, Go West, Mother Road, Rose of Sharon, and Whispers in the Rain. Those are all fantastic songs that I would recommend any Camel fan or aspiring Camel fan to go and check out. Those are all well-written songs. Very nice. Dad, you're number 8.
At number 8, I have Breathless. So this is where we're into the mixture of the Canterbury scene with Richard St. Clair in the band. And it is close to being a classic Camel album. However, I think the mix of Caravan and Camel didn't have the potential. Obviously, it didn't go forward. They didn't go forward with this lineup. So sometimes it does sound a bit like two different bands, right, on the same album.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they're classic tracks, they didn't stick to a direction.
Yeah.
So, and they certainly didn't stick to it after this album. So it has that Canterbury sound and a little bit of jazz fusion, and it's a great album. But at 8, I have Breathless.
My number 8 is also going to be Breathless. The second and last album to feature Caravan's Richard Sinclair, whose input and songwriting definitely bled into Camel more on this album, I think. The folky Canterbury scene definitely works its way into the sound, with songs like Down on the Farm, Starlight Ride, and even The Sleeper. Yeah. Very good album, all things considered. Just another album that's victim to the they did better albums argument. My standout tracks are Breathless. I love that track, especially the way it opens. Gorgeous. Echoes is stellar. Down on the Farm, I really enjoy it. It's very, it's funny. It's comedic. I like the lyrics. I like the song. It's fun. It's cheesy. Summer Lightning is fantastic, and Rainbow's End is also brilliant. Let's go on to number 7.
Well, I will stick with the theme of the Canterbury scene, and it's the Richard St. Clair connection with Caravan, and I will pick Rain Dances. Rain Dances is very similar to Breathless. It's a really good mix of Canterbury and jazz fusion and symphonic prog, and it's one of the classic Camel albums.
My number 7 is the ever-loved Mirage, released in 74. This is a classic. Their highest rated album on Prog Archives, and they're one of their most critically acclaimed albums. While I do love this album, and I believe it has the elements of coming albums like Snow Goose, Moon Madness, I think these three, out of those 3 albums that I just mentioned, Mirage, Snow Goose, Moon Madness, I think that this one's the weakest of those 3. This one doesn't deliver that Camel sound as well as those 2, as close as this is to getting there. It has the amateurish writing that the original debut had, and it was definitely finding its way. Generally, no complaints. I don't have any real big thing like bad. Like, I don't have any big gripes about this album. I just think that they still did better than this. The standout tracks are Freefall, which I think is an absolute Camel classic track. Super Twister, Nimberdell, and Earthrise is also good. I think Lady Fantasy is fantastic from time to time as well. Number 6.
Again, following off the things you have said, I will go with Mirage.
Wow. Okay.
Again, I agree with you that it sounds a lot like the debut. It does start to get some of the classic Camel sound that comes on the next few albums.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite get there, and it still has a little bit of that Doorsy feel.
Yeah, here and there, for sure. With Peter Bardenz's organ playing almost in a way, it's almost very Doorsy what he does.
So I do appreciate that other people think it's the classic Camel album, but I like it a lot, but it's not the classic Camel album for me. So
It was the perfect middle of the road for me, and that's pretty good considering there's no bad Camel album. All right, number 6. It's time to start pissing some people off. The Single Factor, which is absolutely hated on Prog Archives. It's their lowest rated one there. I'm very well aware that we reference that website a lot, but it's a prolific website, so it makes sense to bring up, especially in a prog rock context. And while it's not a top 5 album for me, Single Factor, so before we start ripping my head off, it does make arguments for being top 5, though. It has songs that are definitely worthy, catchy songs like No Easy Answer, Today's Goodbye. It also has beautiful instrumental bits like Selva and Sasquatch, which features Anthony Phillips. We love Anthony Phillips here in the Prog land, right?
Yes.
I really do love Heroes is fantastic too. David Payton. Oh, goosebumps every time I hear that one. That's a fantastic song. I also like the concept of the lullaby. I like it, but I don't love that it's only on one speaker when you listen to it with headphones. I don't love that. But generally, it's great, and I hate that it's just down so far. I don't have a huge love in my heart for the song Manic. It's good, but again, I think they did better albums from here. So my standout tracks are No Easy Answer, which I think we can both agree is fantastic. Heroes, same. Selva, Sasquatch. Camelog is fantastic. Today's Goodbye, A Heart's Desire, and End Peace are wonderful. So, Dad, you're number 5.
Okay, so for the top 5, I'm going to join you again in going off the standard sort of what, again, you mentioned the Prague archives,
Yep,
and it's a good reference because
it is. It's
I
their
think we
big
just we discussed on earlier episode of the idea that although it does have a bias towards
the
the
collaborator reviews rather than the user reviews.
yeah the yeah that there's a bias towards the opinions of the people who run that website.
Yeah.
For overall, it's probably not terribly misrepresentative of what a lot of people
Will
think
come to
and
Prague
would agree on.
seeing. When you think of like the classic bands of Prague, Prague Archives does align with a lot of those ideologies. So we can't really fault them there. That's one of the big reasons why it's such a well-respected and prolific website when it comes down to prog rock listeners and users.
Yeah, so I think it's a reasonable reference.
Yes.
And but I had already gone off the beaten path with Mirage,
Yeah.
and I will continue. At number 5, I have a classic album, but it's still my number 5. It's the Snow Goose. Absolutely love it, but it's definitely sort of the instrumental and early side, sort of the first classic period of Camel.
Mm-hmm.
So if for the slightly more uh accessible listener, this album is not the easiest album to get into.
No.
You really have to be it has to be a nice snowy day in December, and for you to be in the mood for this particular album. Although I
Yeah.
can listen to it anytime because I can listen to Camel every day of my life, no
Me too.
problem. But yeah, so at number 5, again, it's a classic Camel sound, but
Yep.
For me, it's number 5.
Mm-hmm.
Over to you.
My number 5. I'm gonna follow up with some points that you made on number 7, and I'm gonna say this album is worthy of my top 5. Rain Dances. This album, the single problem that I have with this album is that I don't love the structure. I don't love that the last songs on this album are all instrumental, the last 4 tracks. I think that you could have split up the sung tracks with the instrumental tracks, probably mixed them together, jumbled them around a little bit more, and you probably would have I think it would have worked a little bit better. But I definitely see a little bit more of the Hatfield and the North sound come onto this album more than the Caravan sound. And I love that. The slightly more jazz influenced side of a Canterbury scene pops out a lot more here and a little bit more tastefully here. I do wish that there were a few more sung songs on this album, but that's just me. Maybe spreading out the instrumentals like I already said. But otherwise, the production, inclusion of Richard Sinclair, the more jazz take on Camel, and catchy, solid Camel tracks. Solid. Brilliant. The standout tracks for me are First Light, which is probably one of my favorite instrumentals they ever wrote. Metronome, funny name. Tell Me, very good. Highways of the Sun is one of my absolute favorite Camel tracks they ever wrote. Uneven Song is fantastic too. One of these days I'll get an early night. Very jazzy in a way. Jazz rocky. I like that. Very good. Skylines is great, and of course the title track of Rain Dances is also fantastic. So, number 4.
Again, I will continue in my theme of going off the beaten path here a little bit. And at number 4, I have Moon Madness. It's part of sort of the mid-70s classic Camel sound.
Yep.
And it sounds similar to the Snow Goose. But it's kind of weak on the vocal side for sure. Although it's got great mood and classic keyboard playing from Peter Bardenz.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a classic album. I have it at number 4, but,
Yeah.
pretty good.
So, with my number 4, we're going to get into a little bit of a longer discussion. The Snow Goose. Both versions. Which I think we can talk a little bit about. We did listen to the re-recording. I know a little bit more about the re-recording. I've listened to it a good bit. Dad, what do you remember of the re-recording?
not a lot. I think was there's a little bit more strings and
Hmm.
real instruments replacing some of the synth parts, or maybe
Yeah.
some of the,
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe that's what I remember. I
Hmm.
have such an attachment to the original recording that
Yeah.
I don't feel the need to
Yeah.
have the re-recording. I appreciate it
Hmm.
and I like it, but it's not going to be replace the original
No.
recording for me.
No. That's why I categorize them together. There are very few albums that Camel is known for, but this is absolutely one of the most well-known Camel albums. This is probably their most well-known album. This is probably the album that put them on the radar. But I will say that this is probably their most unique record because it's instrumental all the way through. It's based on it's an instrumental album based on a children's book, The Snow Goose, a story of Dunkirk by Paul Gallio. Yeah, Paul Gallico. The music here is absolutely just the most pure Camel you'll ever hear. I think we can agree there too. Um, it's their 70s sound in a nutshell. You'll hear very emotional music, incredibly well written. The re-recording does a very good job at capturing a good chunk of the original's magic, but not enough. I think that there is a lot of, for example, I think that because I did instead of talking about standout tracks, I talked about from version to version which tracks are done better on this version or this one, and I think I've got a few good ones. I do think that Ryder Goes to Town on the original mix is better, and I also think that Peter Barden's keyboard sounds on there are better. And I like the tone a little bit more. That's just my personal taste. Sanctuary, yeah, I would absolutely 1000% replace Sanctuary from this version of 2013 on the Snow Goose. I would put it on the original mix because they basically just tripled the length and it just sounds beautiful. It's great. But basically, when it comes down to what version I prefer, I'm going to go with the original mix myself. But generally speaking, I think that the Snow Goose is such a classic recording that you can't really go wrong with it. It's very good. It's well recorded. It's well mixed. It's got a great emotion to it. Brilliant. You can't go wrong. But it's my number 4. So, Dad, number 3.
Yeah, so we're down to the short straws, as they say.
Oh, this is where this is the most important 3 on the list.
So given that most people watching this video are probably familiar with the Camel discography,
Yep.
they will know that I don't have any of the early set. I've already passed by all the classic early to mid 70s albums like Moon Madness. So basically now I'm down to late 70s and early 80s. And so at number 3, I have the Single Factor, which is a very disparaged and beaten up on album. It, according to Wikipedia, which probably makes sense, it says that this was a contractual obligation album. In other words, they
Hmm.
were contractually obligated to deliver another album, and I guess they were kind of trying to snub the record company by saying, "Oh, the Single Factor," because the record company was pushing them to have hit singles.
Yeah, that actually
So,
makes sense.
well, they weren't selling enough albums, and that's the way
No.
that's the way it works.
No, but you're asking a prog band to sell albums. That's really tough.
So I would guess, obviously, I've had this at number 3, so I
Mhm.
absolutely love this album. But I would guess that what they did was you put on the radio and you say, well, what songs that are on the radio by other bands would we even come close to writing anything like? And I think that it's pretty obvious that they chose the Alan Parsons Project and
Yeah.
said, let's do an album that's a bit more like an Alan Parsons album. And it does sound a little bit like a late 70s Alan Parsons album.
Brought a lot of those guys
Maybe,
on.
yeah, with a lot of the Alan Parsons people are on it.
Chris Rainbow, David Payton,
So
who were regulars on Camel albums for a while there.
a person who's watching this video who hasn't heard these things, it's like, if you like late 70s uh, uh, Alan Parsons, like albums like Turn of a Friendly Card and Pyramid, you're probably going to like this album. It has a very similar feel, and as I'm an Alan Parsons fanatic, that's probably one of the reasons why I absolutely love this album, and I love the direction that they went in. You know, it certainly solved one problem, which was that they didn't have the greatest vocals, and now that you got these Alan Parsons vocalists like Chris Rainbow, all of a sudden you got great singers on these, and the songs are not really that different from what they did before. It still sounds like Camel.
Yeah. It's just got a little bit more
With
of
a
the
little
Alan
bit of
Parsons tinge to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Makes
yeah,
total
number
sense.
3, Single Factor.
My number 3, I'm going to pull from the same set of straws you are, is going to be Nude. I think that this is a very criminally underrated album. It is decently rated on Prog Archives. However, I think that it's still a little bit too low. Nude to me is the ultimate Camel concept album. It's everything I loved about the late 70s and early 80s Camel, mixed in with the Snow Goose. Solid, catchy, and prog songwriting. Great instrumentals. Classic and inventive Camel songs. And very well produced. The story and the concept is also very compelling. It's based on Hiro Onoda as marooning on an island in the Philippines during the Second World War. They wrote the music around that very well, I think. I do have my shallow spots on this album, but very, very few and far between. There are almost never moments on this album where I'm like, I should probably skip a track. Maybe once, maybe twice. It's a 16-song album, so it's got at least one or two of those. But it's great overall. It's quality. Solid. Standout tracks to me are City Life, Drafted, Docked, Docks, Beached, Landscapes, Pomp and Circumstance, Come Back, Please Come Home, Lies, Last Farewell, Birthday Cake, and Nude's Return. Fantastic. Nothing wrong with this album, generally speaking. In the grand scheme of things, solid. Dad, you're number 2.
My number 2 is Nude. It's an absolutely fantastic concept album. The concept is extremely interesting, and lots of standout keyboard playing from Jan Shalas and Duncan McKay. Yeah, again, that has an Alan Parsons feel to it, but again, just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Number 2, no problem.
Yeah. My number 2 is going to be a
Over to
classic,
you.
and I'm just going to point this out. Dad, everyone knows after that what our number 1 is if they already know the Camel discography. So let's piss them all off with our last one, and I'm going to piss them all off with number 2 because Moon Madness is my number 2, the one that everyone usually puts at number 1 or 2, but in favor of Mirage usually. I love this record. This is Snow Goose and Moon Madness are very, very similar albums, like you said, in terms of how they sound. However, Moon Madness has vocals and lyrics, whereas Snow Goose doesn't. Also, Moon Madness actually has traditional prog songwriting formats, whereas Snow Goose was basically just a big 20-song thing that was split into many interludes and many long tracks on its own. Generally, when it comes down to the songwriting, it's the Camel sound. It's the Camel signature sound. This is the album that people point to when they say, this is the Camel sound. It sounds like Snow Goose had vocals and formulated song structure instead of concept album structure. Fantastic, no notes. I have nothing bad to say about it. Standout tracks are Aristolis. Song Within a Song is brilliant. Chord Change is amazing. Spirit in the Water is absolutely incredible. Another Night and Lunar Sea. I understand why people love this album so much. There are many albums in Camel's discography that are praised. This one, I think, is extraordinarily respectful and has a very, very respectable rating. I can't argue with it. So, our number one. Dad, how about you start us off?
Yeah, it's going to be somewhat controversial for longer term Camel fans, but I'm going to go with 1979's "I Can See Your House from Here."
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's the greatest Camel album, and it's got all the classic sound of the earlier Camel, but with a little bit of that jazz fusion input, and still having that sort of leaning towards that Alan Parsons-y kind of accessibility, I would say. I don't want to say pop because
it's not an accurate description of what it is. It's just not.
Well, it might have been
poppier than the norm.
Somewhat leaning into some of the soft rock sounds of the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't get arrested playing that stuff now. So it's no longer pop music. It's people. That's some of those soft rock sounds. Just went completely out of style by even the late 80s, early 90s. So now it sounds really good when you listen to it in retrospect.
Oh yeah. It's just well-written songs.
Yeah, it's just really well-written songs. So yeah, I Can See Your House from Here. That's my number one for sure.
As with me, my number one is also I Can See Your House from Here. And I know that there's going to be some... and listen, Camel fans, I know that there's a lot of Camel fans out here who are very, very in love with this band and understand that not everyone's going to have the same opinion. However, there are going to be some shit-eating, gatekeeping fans who are going to be like, I Can See Your House from Here, you're not a true Camel fan. Those are the people who I'm intending to piss off right now. And I think I Can See Your House from Here is definitely the most divisive album in their entire discography. By the, yet again, this album is quite disliked on Prog Archives. There is a particular reviewer who says that this is Camel dung. I humbly disagree with the idea that this album isn't prog. It's more on the Alan Parsons-y side, yes, but kind of like albums going forward anyway. This album was the turning point that made Camel so an even stronger songwriting band, in my humble opinion. It's got the down moments. It's got the down moments you want, with songs like Ice, Eye of the Storm, Who We Are. It's also got the more energetic prog songs like Wait, more songs that are song-oriented prog like Hymn to Her, Neon Magic, Your Love is Stranger Than Mine. All these songs are very technically difficult. You can still hear like Jan Shalhaz and Kit Watkins doing incredible keyboard playing, chord structures, moving their hands all over the place. It's not like this Camel stuff is easy to play pop. It's not. It's just that anyone who says that this is easy to play pop is lying. It's not true. It's simply, it's objectively false. Anyone who can say, that's easy to play, get behind a keyboard and actually play Jan Shalhaz's parts in Your Love is Stranger Than Mine. That is not an easy keyboard part. It's not. It is a little bit more soft rock written, though. I'll give it that. Maybe Remote Romance is the song that hits a little bit more of that synth pop stuff that was going on in that same time. But I believe that song is actually written by Kit Watkins of Happy the Man.
Yeah.
So what do we do there? What do we do? So you're going to... I think a lot of people like Happy the Man, so let's not rip on the man too much, you know what I mean? Solid through and through. I'm sorry, Camel fans, but this is my number one. Standout tracks are Wait, Your Love is Stranger Than Mine, Eye of the Storm, Who We Are, Hymn to Her, Neon Magic, and Ice. Anyone who is willing to listen to a little bit of Camel, go ahead, do yourself a favor, listen to those tracks. They're all incredible. So, that's it. That's the Camel discography. What do we think? How do we feel like we did? Dad?
Fantastic.
I think that with that, our strong opinions on these albums have finally been recorded. And there you go. Everyone, I hope that you enjoy this video because this is one of those great topics to talk about. Camel is one of those great classic bands that you'll hear about when you are starting your prog rock journey. And I hope that this list gives a little bit of incentive to those who are aspiring Camel fans to maybe have a little bit of an idea of where to potentially go. So, with that, Dad, do you have anything to wrap up?
No, just listen to Camel.
Yeah, indeed. Listen to Camel. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all very much for watching. And we will see you in the next video. Peace.